Daisy. Zach.
I can remember that. With an H.
Yeah, they're with
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, I can grandpa.
Hi, Dave. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today. This is the start of our 26th season for the IFOB. So we held off in the snowy months, supposedly, of January and February, but we're kicking it in now with March. So thank you all for joining us. I'm Catherine Wygant Fawcett. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Family-Owned Business, otherwise known as IFOB. Thank you to Key Private Bank for being our title sponsor for our how-to series. We have these here. And thank you to Hussey University, Maine Biz, and HR Convention for also helping sponsor us today. I'd like to welcome our remote users. We will be recording this program so that those who couldn't make it can also see it later on. IFOB is a nonprofit that helps family businesses succeed. And we have over 50 programs, and I have my hierarchy color-coded chart for you guys out front that has those 50 programs. Green is good. That means everybody can come to those. If you're pink, the ladies can come too. Men wanted to get into our highly popular golf wine and nine, but the ladies said no. But you can come to our scramble, so that we have later too. We also have various affinity groups and things that we work with. It's also time for our nominations for our awards. So it'll be our 21st award ceremony coming up. We're excited to have Fred Forsley from Shipyard Brewing Company as our speaker. So might be a little beer theme, a little fun things there tied in. And if you have anybody that you know who would like to, that you'd like to recognize as a wonderful family business, they will know that you nominated them. It's an easy process. You just go onto our website and sign up. And then if they do sign up and complete the application, there's a long list of benefits that they get from it. They don't need to be members of the Institute. And if they do fill out the application, we give them 2 free tickets to the awards night and then a complimentary membership from June through to December so that they can know about the programs. We can learn about them and they can learn about us. So that the awards program is June 9th, so mark your calendar, save that. It's lots of fun. My goal is always to make grown men cry, and they do. So it's like, because we have nominations, and then we have finalists, and then it's like the Oscars, and we have 7 winners, and nobody knows till we get there. So if you haven't been, it's really, really fun. And then today, we have our amazing lineup with Hussey and Maureen Wedge, who have been very involved with the Institute for a long time. Maureen helped hire me, so that's always nice. And I think started in the very, very beginning. Yeah, so we have some of our board members and others here who are carrying that on. So they will be announcing and introducing the panelists and everyone. Do you want the agenda? You can, if you want. If you want. Yeah, if you want. There we go. Here's your agenda. And we do, as I mentioned, this is the kickoff to our how-to series. You don't have to go to all of them, they're independent, but the next one is on May 6th. It's on workforce development. And then we always have one on succession planning, so we'll have that on June 18th. In a few minutes, I'll ask them out to join us. And then I'll also ask Colby to come up, who's one of our sponsors. And at the end of the program, we do ask you to please fill out our survey. We've gone from 95 to 99 to 100% good to excellent programs, so no pressure today. Okay. Come on back. So, and since we do ask a few minutes of your time to do that, we do have some lovely door prizes for you while you're putting that. So at the end of the time, we'll come around and we have, you can put your business card in. If you don't have a business card, you can fold your name tag and we'll do that. And Brooke does have some of our postcards for our other programs. And I think that will wrap it up for me, and I'll invite Colby up. Thanks.
Oh. I was worried about
that. Hi everyone, my name is Colby Gray. I'm with the Maine HR Convention. For those of you who are unfamiliar, We are a 5-day HR conference that this year is happening May 11th to the 15th at the Samoset Resort in Rockport, Maine. We're excited to say we're going into our 25th year, and we have a great lineup this year, including 2 returning programs, an HR basic training program, great for those who are new to HR and looking to gain some knowledge to bring back, and a supervisor day for any frontline managers who make smart legal decisions and looking to gain more knowledge on FMLA or anything of that sort. So I have some flyers on the table. If anyone has any information, please feel free to find me. Or any questions, I should say. Thanks.
Thank you.
And now over to Anna. You're welcome.
All right. So good morning. I don't usually have a problem being heard, but if you can't hear me, can you just raise your hand? And the same would go for Maureen when she speaks. She speaks more softly than I do, so.
I'll try really hard.
So I'm Ann Hussey, and I am a partner of Quad Group. And Quad Group is a consulting firm, and we work with family businesses, really helping them achieve success. That's our goal. I'm also owner of Hussey Seating Company, a 6th-generation owner, and I currently serve as chair of our family council, which is our family governance model. And then I'm also on the board of directors as a family member. We'll talk about that a little bit more. A really quick history about the Hussey board, just to give some context as we go into this. We've had a board with independent or outside directors since the mid-1960s. The story goes that my dad was the treasurer at the time and was looking for some financing with a bank. Halsey Smith, I don't know if anybody remembers that name, was the person he was working with, and Halsey said, you know, we'd be a lot more inclined to partner with you if you had a board, among other things, if you had a board with independent directors. And so we've had that for now, 50 years, and it's really been a strategic advantage for us. As a family member, I feel that way, and you'll hear more about that from other folks as we get into the panelists. With me this morning is Maureen Wedge, and Maureen and I have known each other for, I guess it's about 21 years, as we work together on what has now become the Family Business of the Year Award. We were part of the committee that developed the process and put all that together, and exciting to see how successful it still is. Catherine Cloudman, over in the corner over there, was also on our committee and involved with that, and we'll hear more from Catherine later as she's one of our panelists. Maureen, do you want to do a quick intro?
Sure. Good morning. So just a little bit of background about me. I was a former co-owner and co-CEO of our family's 4th generation family business, Sun Media Group. I worked with my dad, my 3 brothers, and a brother-in-law for the better part of 31 years. So as far as boards go, we started with a family board, and we had family meetings. And then we transitioned to an outside board with the majority of outside members. We had our first official board meeting in 1999. So the board was active for about 18 years, I guess. And I can't tell you how much value they added to our business over that period of time. After my dad's passing, we had to make the decision, and it was a really difficult decision for our family. We either needed to significantly grow in order to compete and survive in our very mature industry, or we needed to take the business through a sale. We made the decision together as owners with the support of our board and the guidance from our board to take the company through a successful sale in 2017. Fast forward to today, I'm working with my amazing partners at Quad Group, helping family businesses and giving back some of the knowledge and information that I learned throughout my career. Thank you.
So this is our agenda for the next, say, 45 minutes or so. And we'll go through introductions. We've done that, so we can check that off the list. Yay. We're going to talk about myths. So what is it that people believe or perceive to be the reasons that they don't have a board? And we've identified kind of the top 10 questions, so we'll go through those and hopefully provide some valuable answers to that. And then we'll invite up our panelists who will provide kind of real life stories, how to make this come to life. So let's talk about the myths. So some of the things that we wanted to do here was, kind of get an audience show of what do you think are the reasons that family members, family businesses don't have boards. Hopefully the coffee's kicked in. This is audience participation time. So I'm really looking for people to suggest ideas for why family businesses might not have boards. Thoughts? Yes.
Privacy reasons.
Privacy. Good one. Come on, that coffee. Yes, Jana.
Okay, I have to. Maybe financially, they don't feel they can afford to pay what they might have to pay for that outside board.
Perfect. What else?
Time.
Time. Great. Tell me more.
It's just to organize and execute a board of directors takes time, and they got enough going on.
Yep. Absolutely. Yes.
They might not want full time and what to do.
Yes. I'm sure we'll hear more about that.
We didn't plant these people either.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you that up front.
Any others? All right. So we've got a list. I think somebody, loss of control. I don't want someone telling me what to do, right? Expensive. What's it going to cost me to bring on a board? Thank you, Jana. Could have planted you. Who knows the business better than me? Nobody. So I am the expert of my business. I don't want to be told what to do. Confidentiality. I don't want to share my business information, my financials, with anybody else, right? I want to keep this very private in my family. Okay, family dynamics. We've all worked in family businesses. It's not always harmonious. Most of the time, I'm sure it is, but what do? We don't want to air our dirty laundry. And then there's the time. How am I going to, what Steve said, how am I going to manage the amount of time it takes to have a board, to be active with that board, create the agenda, and the follow through? I think that's it. Yep. All right, so top 10 questions.
So today, we developed a top 10 list of questions, and we'll cover each question sort of in a general way, but we'll provide you with some good takeaways. So first question, how do I know when I need a board? Sorry.
Sorry.
She's taking a break over there,
Yeah.
I think. What value will a board bring to my company? What kind of board do I need? Who should be on the board? How do I know the right mix of family and independent members? What's the right size? How do I find people? Do I need board member terms? Can I fire my board? Do I need to pay my board? So there's a list of top 10 questions that we'll kind of go through and try to answer for you today. Jumping right into our first question, how do I know if I need a board? We really believe that any company can benefit from a board. It's not like waving a magic wand or anything, but research shows that 85% of CEOs who put a board in place said it was their single best management decision that they made. That's a pretty strong statement. Certainly, if you're looking to achieve new levels of accountability, a board can provide oversight. The board will push the business to the next level, sort of hold your feet to the fire. The board doesn't let management forget about what it said it was going to do. I remember our board saying, you said you were going to do that last month. How come it's not done yet? And I think that was probably directed at one of my brothers. And but we won't go there. If you want to strengthen the business The board can help you grow and diversify. It gives you depth and fresh perspectives. It helps you answer questions like, should we expand our product line? Should we grow internally, or should we acquire a new business? Should an unprofitable segment of our business be shut down? A board helps you with your strategic planning. Or if you need help solving the most challenging business issues, a board provides assistance with those tough decisions, promotes honest and open communication, kind of takes the emotions out of the decision making, and there are a lot of emotions in family businesses. So it does help to stabilize those emotions. What value will a board bring? The overall role of a board really is to achieve the family's vision, and the board supports the owner in achieving that vision. The board gives you guidance during succession or transition processes. Having some non-family members to use as a sounding board can reduce conflict. It can help bridge generations, so 2 generations, the board can help bridge that gap, if there is one. It also can provide objective assessments of family members, performance of family members, and key management. And again, taking that emotion out of the equation. It can support in the event of a company crisis. When my dad passed away, we were very thankful that we had a board in place to help support and guide us and really ask us the tough question about the future of our business. Provide expertise during changes in business strategy, acquisition, or diversification. Some of the companies that we've worked with have wanted to acquire companies, and they leaned on their outside board members for advice, for their expertise to position them in the right direction. An outside board will poke holes, and they'll ask questions and provide counsel. To leverage industry experience. Having someone on your board who understands your industry and maybe has a network in your industry could be a huge asset. We hear from some of our clients that it's lonely at the top. As CEO, you often can't share your concerns with your management team. So having a board as a support system, acting as a sounding board, listening, offering advice, it helps the CEO who feels lonely at the top. Provide oversight for the management of the business. Again, asking the tough questions or being a source for new ideas. Credibility, and I like to add accountability and professionalism. Boards offer structure and process, and that leads to credibility, accountability, and professionalism. Banks and other financial institutions look favorably to companies that have outside boards, and that might help with any sort of financing that you might need. And the last one, an expertise gap filler. For example, if your company is lacking in marketing experience or technology experience, you might have a board member to fill that need. A board adds depth to your current management team. Bottom line, we like to refer to the statement, it's management's job to manage the company, and it's the board's job to make sure the company is well managed. So this slide summarizes the roles and responsibilities and expectations of board members. I think when we were answering the value question before this one, we covered most of those board roles and responsibilities, if not all of them. So let's take a look at that bottom portion, the expectations of individual board members. That first bullet speaks to participation at the board and on the board. So attending all the board meetings, participating in discussions. Then it's about being prepared, studying advanced information packets, being ready for the board meeting, being prepared, being available. And sometimes you might only meet quarterly. Our board met quarterly, so I definitely called our board members in between meetings for counsel or a question, maybe some advice. Confidentiality, really important. All information regarding the business and the family must be kept confidential. And then keeping informed and knowledgeable about the business. So that's a good snapshot of the roles and responsibilities and expectations of board members. Any questions so far? Steve?
You said something along the lines of it's the board's responsibility to help the vision happen. What if the board thinks the vision is off? I mean, because they've got other knowledge,
Yeah.
More diverse knowledge, and they think that vision's going down the wrong track.
Yeah. It's up to the board to voice that opinion. Now, depending on what kind of board it is, and we'll get into that, the different kinds of boards. I mean, if it's an advisory board, it's advice and counsel. If it's a board of directors and the majority are outside members, and the outside members vote that this isn't the right direction, then that's a decision that needs to be followed.
And just to add to that, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but if you don't like the information your board is giving you, you can fire them. As owners, you can say, this isn't working for me. So, I mean, that's an extreme to that.
Yeah, but bottom line is the owners have control. Doesn't matter what kind of board it is, the owners have the ultimate control. So that was a good lead-in, Steve, thanks. What kind of board do I need? There are basically 3 types of boards: family, advisory, and a board of directors. And usually in a family business, you move from one board to the next through the life cycle of your company. Does anyone have a board, a family board or an advisory board already?
We're revamping.
Okay.
Good.
Is it a family board or an advisory board?
Advisory.
Good. Anyone else?
Advisory, we've met once.
Okay.
Back in the right.
Family board.
Family board, yep. Good.
To start.
Yep. So a family board is just that. It's composed of family members and usually 100% owners. We call this the dining room table board, because that's where families meet. Family boards meet the minimum requirements of your bylaws. It's probably still the most common type of board for family businesses, although it really adds little or no value to the business. It adds value to the family, but it adds little or no value to the business. An advisory board is composed of family members and independent members or outside members. We use those terms interchangeably. We call the advisory board the round table board because we're moving in a less formal direction. It's not legally constituted. They're informal. There's no liability. These boards can give advice and they can provide some oversight. But an advisory board, as we just said, can't force management to take any action. It's just advice. Some later stage or more developed advisory boards are set up with all the governance best practices, and they will provide oversight and some oversight and strategy and give good counsel to the family business. And then the board of directors, the majority are usually outside members for a board of directors. This board definitely sits around the boardroom table. right? You can picture that. It has fiduciary responsibility, meaning the board has a legal obligation to protect its shareholders and act in the best interest of the company. Key function is to provide oversight, and the decisions that this type of board makes are binding on management. So these are the variations and the different stages in each of these types of boards. Certainly there are a full spectrum within of governance models. There can be many variations of each of these boards, but these are the basic types. We actually recommend that family businesses, take their board model from a family board to an advisory board, starting slowly, just kind of dipping your feet in the ocean, getting comfortable with the idea of governance. And as your board grows, you can use committees too. It just sort of parcels out the work of the board. If you have a small board, it's harder to use committees, but you can still have 2 or 3 people on a committee, and that still can work. The most common committees are an audit committee, and that would oversee your financials and your internal controlling mechanisms. An audit committee is generally made up of only outside members. It's a requirement for public companies, so it's definitely a best practice for privately held companies. You can also have a compensation committee, would review recommendations for executive compensation. You can have a governance nominating committee, an executive committee, or other standing and ad hoc committees. Who should sit on the board? Again, this is unique for each family business. You can have family members and independent members. The family members who sit on the board should really have the skills and experience to help the company achieve their goals. Some boards are set up that only family members who work in the business can sit on the board. Some don't allow spouses to be on the board. And generally, it's not considered a good idea to have close friends on your board. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Each family needs to determine who can and cannot sit on their board. And then as far as the independent members, if you want to start slowly, you could start small, add 1 or 2 independent members that you trust, and then you can build from there. The independent member shouldn't be someone that you're already paying as a consultant, like your accountant or your attorney. They're already part of your team, so paying them to be on your board would be redundant. So you'd probably want to stay away from that. Also stay away from vendors or competitors. The independent member should really be someone that's not already involved in your business.
Maureen?
Yes.
No, you go there.
Maureen, on your board were all members on the, all owners on the board?
No. So we had 4 outside board members and 3 inside family members. So my dad and then 2 members of my generation. And we actually rotated it. That was the way we decided. We rotated those 2 other slots.
So was the CEO, president, or whomever?
That was my dad at the time, yeah.
Okay, so that person was always, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting, okay.
Yeah, and I know Hussey does something different for your board.
Right, so we have 3 family seats, and for example, right now my cousin Letitia is chair of our board. She's never worked for the company, and she's an owner of a trust company. She's part of my generation. My uncle Peter is still alive, so he's in his mid-80s, and he sits on our board. And then I recently joined the board. It's one of those very sought after opportunities because people tend to hang out for a while. So it varies, again, we have 3-year terms. I'll talk about terms a little bit later, but Part of it is, really figuring out what works for you, and, what worked for your company is different than what works for our company, which is probably different than what you would do.
And that is one of our key messages. I think there isn't one size that fits all.
Right. Tom had a question.
Oh, Tom.
Just a suggestion. By osmosis, I came to the conclusion that boards operate more effectively if there is at least one female on the board, because they are mediators and have strengths that are very effective on boards.
Yeah.
In California, there's a new law that every corporation has to have at least one female on the board.
Yep.
And if you haven't had one, I think by the end of December last year, there is a penalty of $100,000. Now, I don't think they really actually implemented that yet, but in California, they're insisting that every board.
Forcing the diversity, really.
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
interesting.
And so boards in history have been almost all male,
Oh, yeah.
and that's got to change.
And I think it is,
Yeah, it is.
yeah.
I think that distinction is just that that's public companies though, right?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, thank you.
They had to force that.
Wrong way.
There we go.
Okay. So question number 5, what's the right mix? The best practice is majority of independent members. So it's a mix of family and non-family. To start, you would want to have at least 2 family members and at least 2 independent members. You wouldn't want to have 1 family member or 1 independent member because it can become uncomfortable if they're expressing viewpoints of one side or another. So you really don't want to leave anyone out on an island by themselves. So have at least 2 of each type. Family members provide the context of family business history, the legacy, the culture, and they're also often in roles of key management, and they're usually owners. Independent members are not biased with the company's history and how we've always done things, and they can really add significant value.
I'm still in control. Oops,
Okay.
and I went backwards again. Oops. Here we go.
Yes.
Do you have experience with a family council and then having a representative from the family council?
Yes, we did have a family council, and those continued as our family meetings. And we also brought spouses into those meetings to educate about the business and that sort of thing. We did not rotate from the family council, we rotated from the owners of the 4th generation.
So one thing along that line, Sharon, that I've learned about, and that at some point I'm letting the cat out of the bag because we have a board member and the CEO here today from Hussey Seating, but we talked about, as part of an educational process, having somebody on the family council in an observer role in the board. So part of it is, how do you prepare somebody, thinking of the rising generation, how do you prepare them to be on the board? And so part of it is access. And so we're looking at, is that an option that we could consider for our family council, which is the family governance piece, to see if that's an opportunity. So good question. All right, size of the board. So of course we all want to do things right, but there's no perfect size board. It needs to be the right size for your company. Each company is unique, so it needs to kind of match up with that. Best practices include using an odd number. Hopefully that's intuitive, but boards vote, and it's a lot easier to have an odd number vote and manage to the results of that. The other guideline is to make sure that your board is not too big or too small for your business, kind of like the Goldilocks scenario. You don't want a really small company with a really big board. That just becomes unwieldy. So according to research, the majority of family businesses in generations 1, 2, and 3 is between 5 and 7 board members. And I think that's probably, we talked about our boards, our family businesses, we both had 7. So I'm not saying we're right, but it's right for our businesses. So somewhere between 5 and 7. We've talked about our independent board members already. So how do I find people? So now Maureen talked about who should serve on your board. So first you have to identify what is it you're looking for. What's the profile? What are the criteria of your board? Do you need, for example, a leader of a family-owned business? Do you need somebody with industry experience? Do you need somebody who has a financial expertise or somebody who has proven record of business diversification? So once, we'll jump quickly, hopefully, here we go, to this is the criteria that the Sun Journal used. I'm gonna bump this over to Maureen for a minute.
So we put this together when we were searching for our outside board members. So we wanted all the board members to have the qualities listed there. I won't read them, but from trustworthiness all the way to a proven track record. And then the second part was the criteria or the profile that we were looking for when we were developing our board. So we were looking for someone with newspaper experience at the highest level, a publisher, CEO, or general manager with at least 10 years experience and from a newspaper outside of our market. We didn't want a competitor on our board. So as I mentioned before, probably not a good idea. We wanted someone with family business experience. And since we wanted to acquire and diversify our business, we wanted someone with that type of experience. And then we were looking for marketing and technology backgrounds because our business was changing substantially and we wanted expertise in those areas.
Once you set that criteria, how hard, was it hard or easy for you to find people to different?
It's pretty easy. Now, Anne corrected me when I went through this earlier. We weren't looking for one person to have all of these things.
Yeah.
We had 4 outside board members.
So of those 4, they had to all
Yes.
cover those topics.
Exactly.
And maybe you'll get into this as about me, but how did you work with like a leadership or something to, okay.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay. So why don't we go right into that? Thank you so much for that segue, Lindsay. So you've got the criteria. You know what you need, what Maureen showed for Sun Journal, for example. Now you've got to find them. Use your network, right? I mean, that's one of the strongest assets that you have. So if you need someone with financial expertise, talk to your CPA or your tax attorney or talk to somebody who's in that industry. If it's international growth that you're looking for, maybe, I think most people are involved in an industry group or association. That might be a great place to start with that. And then talk to people. Ask people who know you, who know your business. It could be your lawyer, your accountant, your sister-in-law. It could be people who serve on another board with you. Start asking questions of people who can provide that support. The other piece is if you're looking for a member, you already have a board, but you have a vacancy. Ask your board members. They're a great resource for that. We do have professional board placement organization on this slide. Most family businesses have resources that will help them find fit, and fit is really important on a board. And so that's probably one of the most important characteristics of a board member is if they fit with the other board, with the family, and certainly with the CEO. So now you have a candidate for the board. So what do you do next? And so it really becomes part of the screening process. And there are many ways you can do this. So you could have a nominating committee that goes through and does initial screening of candidates. They may be the ones that propose it to the ownership. You could have something on the other end of the spectrum that's not quite as formal, where the CEO, the family member CEO, interviews and makes some of those decisions. There's a whole spectrum of how those decisions are made. We actually have a tool that we'll share in a little bit around decision-making best practices, but it's kind of the whole spectrum in terms of how those decisions get made and who's bringing in the decision for that board member. So I'm going to skip past that. So let's talk about terms, because I think that came up. How long do you want your board members to serve? If they're good and they stay current in your industry, you probably want them to stick around for a while. Creating terms is definitely a best practice. It helps create expectations for your board members, as well as making sure that your board stays fresh. So I know some companies who've had boards where their board members have either retired or they've changed careers and they no longer bring the same amount of value to the business. So it's a lot easier if there's a process associated with renewing terms. Creating terms for the boards also encourages family owners and family leaders to think about what they want for board composition. So if their term is up and they decide they are ready to move on to greener pastures somewhere else, knowing what the composition goals of the board, knowing what your skills are, it helps you manage to that. For example, at Hussey Seating, we have 3-year terms. They're definitely renewable. We like to keep some of our board members around for a while. And we don't want to see a turnover of valuable board members happen all at once. So staggered renewable terms is definitely best practice. I love it.
So when you're regrouping and refreshing your board, any suggestions on, bringing those outsiders in, because they would if you bring them all in at once, they would term out in theory at the same time, and that's kind of,
Yeah, that's, create some,
I don't know these initial terms that are different.
right, right. So you could start somebody with a longer term
2,
and,
3, 4, 5.
right.
Whatever, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what you want to avoid. So can I fire my board? Pardon me, we talked about this a few minutes ago. Remember, the board reports to the owners. So they work at the request of the owners, but if they're not adding value anymore, you can certainly dismiss them. Maybe fire is a tough word, but it was provocative. Due to confidentiality requirements here, I'm not going to talk about our clients. What I will say is I'm going to use Hussey Seating as an example again. I think we've developed a lot of work around this. We have a set of owners who are the voting owners for the board. Every year we have an annual meeting. We actually have a structured discussion around the board members whose terms have come up for renewal. And we, as a shareholder group, meet and we vote on the individual board members. We could decide to ask somebody to resign. Right now, we've got an amazing board, so that's not something that we're trying to do. But if the match was no longer good, then we would probably ask them to make some different choices around what board they're sitting on. It's definitely uncomfortable. It's something we've done before, but remember, the board reports to the owners. So that's that control piece. Now, we do have, and I know it's hard to read here, but this is an example of kind of a generic board evaluation form. I think it's way too much, but think of it as a pick list, right? You could say, I like number 3, number 10, and number 15, and those are the ones that I'm going to use to evaluate my board. Having some structured way to evaluate the performance of your board is really helpful, especially for owners who are not sitting on the board, understanding what the board's contribution is and where they are, in terms of, their strength and their value. Make sense? Again, best practice, but use only what fits. Because that was way intimidating. Do I need to pay my board? I think we talked about that earlier. That's a reason some people sometimes don't want to have boards is, can I afford one? So when we talk about this, we think a little bit about, sometimes in life you get what you pay for. So a best practice is to compensate the board, but compensate them based on what you're asking of them and what you think works for your business and your budget, obviously. So some boards are paid on a retainer basis, and some are paid on a per meeting. It depends how many meetings you have during the course of the year. I mean, those are all variables that you need to manage. But basically, in the state of Maine, we see compensation for board members range between $500 a meeting to $2,000 a meeting. So again, what works for you? How often are you meeting, and what are you asking of your board? So a lot of what we've been talking about this morning are components of a board charter. And again, this is a best practice. And this is just an outline, but these are, having a board charter helps create a document that everybody agrees to. It's a best practice. It's a living document. You would update it on a periodic basis so that it continues to be reviewed and evaluated. This is a sample outline. So again, a lot of these tools that we're showing, use what works for you. But this is kind of a best practice. And then one more tool to talk about really briefly is decision making. And this is tough. This is a sample, and the categories, it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but on the left-hand side are topics. And then we've got the owner, the board, and management as columns. And part of it is the discussion to find alignment on who has decision-making for what type of task, right? And it's hard. And something like this is a great tool to facilitate those discussions between family members, management, and the board, and to make sure, like, who owns the CEO performance and compensation review? Well, it certainly isn't the family. Believe me, if you have a board, that falls under the board. So this was the last tool, I think. Let me just check my notes. So yes, that was the last tool that we wanted to share. Now what we're going to do is change the pace a little bit. We're going to bring up our panelists, and we're going to introduce them, and then again, have another cup of coffee if you need, but this is more of that participation by the audience. So they will talk a little bit. Maureen's going to ask them some questions. We'll get things started, and then we really want you to take the opportunity to ask these folks real life questions. Okay? You guys want to come up?
No.
And you see your name tags.
I gotta figure that out.
Yeah. Sit where you have to.
It's a test.
You can get more coffee if you're going to raise your hand and participate. Stretch for a second. Yes.
I know, I'll take advantage of it.
Yeah.
That was very good.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll hold it.
You weren't supposed to raise your hand, but I like that because it was a diversity.
Thank you.
No, I love your questions. Appreciate that.
Did you lose your name tag already?
Yep, you just push this.
There's so much that we can't
Sprayed it all over. I guess the, you should have turned.
I hope so.
Careful, just. There.
Did you spill?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
Sprayed all over.
Well, there you go, you're really disinfected.
You're disinfected.
From head to toe now.
All right, why don't we, I'm going to keep us moving, just managing time. Good. All right.
Every week.
You're missing my great slide of how the curtains open.
Oh. Very good.
I love that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I like that, bravo.
Bravo to them. All right. So first what we're going to do is have each of the panelists introduce themselves, and I'm going to start on my left with Gary Merrill. Catherine, we're starting.
We have one person.
Oh.
If you would wait 2 seconds.
Okay. Well, slap my hand.
We're right on schedule.
I know you're on schedule. I told her I'd give her away.
Okay.
She's really dying to hear everything.
Okay. All right.
Oh, is that Lindsay?
Yes. Lindsay's our new board chair.
I was gonna say, you know, if she wasn't chair of the board,
I
it'd be,
know.
of the IFOB board. Yes.
That's-
Talking about board.
Lindsay came
I
down
told
to
her
Hussey
she had
a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Lindsay Gifford.
Gifford, Gifford Ice Cream. She's the CEO of Gifford Ice Cream. She and her brother came down and spent half a day with us.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
But,
25 years ago or 23 years ago, my brother and I came to Hussey Seating.
Met with
Met with
Tim and John.
Tim.
Yeah. Co-CEOs.
Yeah,
Crazy. I'm gonna do that one more time. To my first.
So what do you just want name, rank, and serial number? You want to just name business experience?
I'm
Or
gonna ask you to introduce yourself and provide some background and context. Like how you work with the board, are you on the board? Are you on the board? No, you work with the board, yes.
But you're on other boards.
Right.
for the intro, you just say my name and you want to go on.
Talk a little bit about your background.
It was good to know.
Okay, we can go.
Okay, now?
Now, go.
All right.
Woo! That's awesome.
So we're going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their current role, context with a family board, a family business board. And then Maureen's going to ask them some questions. So we'll start with Gary. If you could introduce yourself and your role and why you're here.
My name is Gary Merrill. I'm the CEO of Hussey Seating Company. I am the first non-family CEO in the company's 185-year history. It's a unique position to be in, but it's one I'm thoroughly enjoying. The value of the boards is very, I think, very important to me. I've been, when I graduated, got out of grad school and went to work in public accounting. And what I observed in the best companies that I, as a public accountant or as a CPA working for Coopers and Lybrand, were those ones with strong boards. I mean, from Hannaford Brothers to Beans to several other companies, they had a strong independent board. And it was very impressive. So that was the first experience I had with companies with strong boards. Hussey has an excellent board. I think it's in our bylaws that 4 independent members and 3 family members. Works very well. Catherine's one of the independent members. She said Phil first instituted that. I think it's a reason why they're on 6th generation going to 7th generation. It wouldn't have happened as the family tree gets bigger and splinters. There's more family issues. And the fact that they have an independent board is very, very helpful in that situation. And I think, as she mentioned, Letitia is her cousin and board chair. I just tell Letitia many times that she has the hard part. She's running the family. I have the easy part, running the company. But it is some dynamics to family companies. But I think the independent board does a great job at helping bridge that.
Great. Thank you, Catherine.
So I'm Catherine Cloudman, and I have kind of a varied background. I spent a dozen or so years owning and operating a boutique consulting firm in the northern New England area and worked with closely held and family-owned businesses. I also worked with my father at the time, so we were kind of working within a family business, and ran that company for a number of years, and then took a little time off when my kids were very young, and then started a company called Apothecary by Design back in 2008, and founded that company with some business partners and was the CFO, and ran that company for 10 years, kind of executing through a variety of different strategies and acquisitions and divestitures of certain lines of business. During that time period, Tim Hussey actually reached out to me to see if I would have an interest in joining the board. And, you know, the funny story behind that, when I was chuckling when you were talking about like how you find board members, do you remember the story of how Tim thought to call me? So we just happened to be in Maine Magazine, one of those 50 Mainers things at the same time, and we were on opposing pages. And he just happened to be like looking for a woman and who had a finance background. And so, you know, I don't know if it was fate, but it's just been a pure joy from my perspective. So I retired from my company in June of 2018. I'm still on the board there, and I'm still an owner there. And in addition to serving on Hussey's board, I'm on the board of Systems Engineering, which is an ESOP, about 150 person ESOP. So it has an interesting and unique ownership and governance structure there. And I recently joined the board of Gorham Savings Bank. So it's kind of the range of backgrounds.
Nice.
Paul?
Well, I'll be a little shorter than Catherine and Gary, so that's good news. I'm Paul White, CEO of Paul White Company. Our company was started in 1970 on tax day, so April 15th, we turned 50.
Wow. Congrats.
Thank you. We have 5 locations, 2 in Portland, 1 in Newmarket, New Hampshire, a small satellite office in Keene, and a satellite office in Bangor. We worked with individual consultants for about 15 years and didn't make as much headway as we have with a board of directors. And we had 3 outside board members, our CFO. Maureen was on our board, and our CFO is female, so we're quite progressive in that. And we really didn't weigh out gender in that. It was more qualifications. It just worked out that way. So it wasn't a requirement to have a mix. It just happened to land that way. So we had a board of directors for over 4 years.
Thank you. Awesome. And you were ahead of the curve then, right?
Yeah.
So thank you. Maureen's going to get this started with a couple of questions. And then again, we're really looking to questions from the audience. Okay. So this is a question for each of the panelists. What is the biggest benefit to the business of having an independent board? You can go in any order, right?
For us, it was accountability, because when we were working with individual consultants, we had 5 or 6 family members, and we could overwhelm a consultant. And I'm pretty sure we drove a lot of them to think about their career choices. When my brother and I became majority shareholders in 2015, the big drive for that was we were bringing in an independent board and enough board members to outvote family members and get away from the dynamic that we were kind of stuck in. And that actually pushed 2 people that really weren't into the whole vision of the company out of the business. They decided to take a buyout. And my dad went into retirement, and my brother and I basically had 3 board members that we answered to. And it was under an advisory structure. But I don't think at any point of the 4-year time, we didn't all agree unanimously on a decision. So it never really came down to a 3-2 vote or a 3-3 vote, and our CFO would have been a tiebreaker. But the 7 of us went out on the same page. Our only disagreements really were on time frame, I think, of how soon we would enact something. So accountability is a big one.
No, I would agree with that. Accountability is probably the most important. But the other thing is just having someone to pick up the phone and talk to. So there's on our board, in addition to Catherine, we have Gene Geiger from Geiger Brothers, Kevin Hancock from Hancock Lumber, and an industry person out of Louisville, Kentucky. But they're all CEOs, and so the opportunity is to talk and get their thoughts and advice is very helpful, and obviously Catherine and her role running companies is very helpful. So I think that's the biggest, one one of the biggest advantages is one, the accountability, and two, the access to be able to call up and bounce ideas, thoughts, or issues off.
Good. Catherine?
Yeah, I would say part of it centers around just kind of getting you out of insular thinking. You know, if it's a lot of people who sit around the table together who are used to talking to one another about the business, then they're not getting sort of an outside check of that thinking, or something that just throws a somewhat small hand grenade into the middle of it that forces you to think outside the box. That to me is what I see happen a lot in the different boards that I'm involved with, and in terms of running my own company. You know, I didn't want anybody who was just reinforcing the thinking that was around the table. I wanted new thinking that was sort of injecting itself and helping us think differently about how we could run the company, or, you know, push us to our outer limits.
Good, thank you. What about the biggest challenge? Start with you, Gary.
Biggest challenge you guys in the business, or with it?
Being a board member.
Being a board member.
Having a board, or working with the board.
I think everybody's business in this room is unique. So the biggest challenge is getting the board person up to speed in terms of your challenges, your industry. And we all like to think we have a very complex business, and we think we have a complex business in terms of who we sell to. I mean, 99% of our sales are outside the state of Maine. So it's we're dealing with contractors, dealers. We have a direct channel. We work with major projects. We have product development.
So how do you do that? How do you get someone up to speed?
Maybe Catherine was our newest board member to join, but and Kevin too. But actually, we had a onboarding process, and Ann's going through it now in terms of coming down, meeting with the CFO, going over the financial statements, understanding how we various metrics we use, then sitting with our sales VP, talking about our customers and our competitors, and then working with our operations and manufacturing people to come again tour the place. They don't need to be experts, but when they hear terminology used in the board meeting and challenges, they need to be able to make those connections. So it takes
time.
It takes a year. I mean, again,
I would agree. I was just going to say that I think there's something to managing your expectations around when you're going to see the full value of a board member contributing. I mean, I think a lot of board members can come in and add value quickly, but I think the highest value comes after some period of time has elapsed.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think that's just really, I mean, it's true of any of our businesses. You have to kind of observe it and live it and feel it and breathe it for a little while. I still joke with the systems engineering folks about all the various acronyms they have for everything. And when I joined the Gorham board, they actually in their board orientation package have a whole list of acronyms so that like your shortcut to what all of these things are, which I thought was fantastic. But it just takes a while to really understand the rhythm of the business. So I think there's lots of things that you can do that are formal in terms of the structure that you put in place to help people get up to speed as quickly as possible. But some of it is through the informal channels of, whether it's creating an informal kind of mentor mentee process with board members, or building the relationships among and between board members and senior leadership team. That's really where some of that happens. I think you all have done a really good job of making sure, hey, if we have the opportunity to grab dinner the night before when someone's coming in from out of town, or do some of those things that are solidifying the relationship of management and board, because at the end of the day, a lot of that comes down to trust and people's ability and comfort level. Being vulnerable with a group comes down to trust. And if you can establish that, the sooner you can get that established, by and between people, the better, the nature of the dynamic and communications will be.
This is all really good stuff because our company is not that sophisticated. Our onboarding basically is we took you to the end of the dock and threw you in the water. So,
Which is probably more common.
yeah, I was gonna say, there's a lot of small companies probably here, and we're not as sophisticated as Hussey, and we still got a lot of benefit out of having a board just by starting like that. We met monthly, and I was amazed at how fast months went by when you hadn't done anything towards your board responsibilities. And the weekend before, you're like, oh my God, I had 8 tasks and I did 2 of them. So it was amazing how quick months went by. And Catherine was right, the trust level, it's very difficult to take that leap of exposing all your financials and how you've done things, however backwards they might be, and subjecting yourself to outside scrutiny. So those are the toughest 2, I'd say, schedule and trust.
You meet monthly?
We met monthly.
We do it quarterly. I mean, monthly, oh my God. It's a lot of work.
It's
it is. That's the other thing that, and I don't mean to go off topic, but it is a huge commitment in terms of getting prepared for a board meeting. And in my company, we met monthly too with our board, and it was a little bit different, right? So we had a private equity partnership, so we had sort of the private equity board structure, which is a whole different dynamic in and of itself.
Okay.
But the work to prepare for a board and pull together a board package and make sure that they have the information that they need is no small task. And I think just thinking about that timing difference of monthly versus quarterly and what's the right balance of time between, what you need to do to run your company on a day in, day out basis and what you need to do to prepare for a board meeting, and making sure that, you're finding that right balance internally to make that work.
And Catherine, doesn't it sometimes depend what kind of issues a company might be dealing with that might drive the frequency of meetings? Like if you're dealing with a succession issue or, a financial issue or something, some of that may require more frequent contact.
Sure, more frequent meetings that might, or calls in between or whatever. But the formality of an actual board meeting, the rhythm and routine of that, I think depends a little bit on what you can handle within sort of running the day-to-day operations. I mean, I found in my own company, I was spending an awful lot of time preparing for board meetings when I really needed to be doing some day-to-day operational tasks. And that was a real sort of tug.
Your board is a formal board of directors with
Correct.
Votes. Yes, ours was advisory. So it was just updating issues monthly. So we didn't have formal votes and a formal board. So it was a little easier to prepare for things. And our outside board members were a little understanding if you didn't get to a certain issue out of the 15 things we might have been working on. So it's a little easier if it's advisory.
How long did it take you guys to realize the board was clicking and working for you?
To us, I mean, it's been, like Ann said, since the 60s. And so I think the rhythm is there. I mean, as we onboard new board members, it takes a little bit for them to learn the business, but I think it clicks for us pretty quickly. I mean, I think, and votes are funny in regards to people saying, I don't want to give up control. I've been involved in boards for a lot of years, and I don't think we've ever had anything but I mean, there's pushback and discussion when there's a particular issue. This could be very passionate. That's what you want them for. They're consultants. You're paying them to be there. They're paying them to give their information. But at the end of the day, that you reach consensus. I can't think of one 4-3 vote that's ever been there. I can't even think of any 6-1 votes. I mean, it's usually by the end of the day, after everybody's heard, you come to consensus and say, yeah, this makes sense. And it's
if it's a 4-3 vote, you didn't sell it well enough.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
It's not ready to do yet.
So the control thing to me is not as important as just you're getting great advice from other people.
Paul, can you, Paul, answer that question as well? How long did it take for you to feel like your board was gelling?
I'd say by the second meeting, once everybody understood the issues and they gave really pertinent advice by the second meeting. But we did a good job of picking board members, I think.
Yeah, got some questions in the back of the room.
So we don't currently have a board, and my family company is not owner at all. My father is 100% owner.
Good luck with that. Boy, have I got some advice for you.
In planning succession, a board is gonna be really helpful, but who decides the board's agenda? Like, obviously, somebody internally in the company, but when you're first creating, you start sitting down and be like, we got a lot of issues, which one should we tackle first? Like, in preparing for a board meeting, everyone has their tasks, but who is creating the tasks for the next one? The agenda and
Does anyone want to take that?
board of one.
Well, for entry level, when we first got started, you have to call out the stuff that isn't board level
Yeah.
discussions, and that can be a little bit of a challenge up front. Do you want your board really talking about the color of the logo or something like that? It's the financials are a real big one. The condition of the company financially and where you want to go. Maybe really important hires like a division manager. You have to give some thought to, is this something that we should be dealing with in-house or something that we want some advice with the board?
So I will just say there's a degree of how that works, right? And I don't know if you'd call it informal to formal, but so I would say in the case of Hussey, I think that you and Letitia as board chair and CEO spend a lot of time planning those agendas for how our board meeting is going to go. I think in some other circumstances that I've been involved with, it's been a little bit more informal in terms of how that process goes. I do think there's a fair amount of management input in terms of what the agenda is going to be, because part of what you're there for is to support management. And so they're trying to lift up the topics that they feel like they need some help with. The other thing I will say is that, folks that have served on boards will also quickly provide feedback around, that's not a board topic, right? Like I think at least our dynamic is we're pretty quick to say that doesn't belong here. Like, let's make sure we're using this time. We only meet 4 times a year. Let's make sure we're using this time in the most valuable way. And so there's a lot of kind of, pushback in both from management and from the board group around what belongs on that agenda.
Usually I'll develop the agenda and send it to Letitia, the board chair, and say, what do you think? And then she and I will go back and forth a little bit. But we're a mature board in that direction. I try to carve out very little time and just for the accountability part is where are we? This is our budget. This is where we're performing after the first quarter, second quarter. This is where sales. So a lot of those types of issues in terms of we on plan and what are our 4 or 5 major objectives of the year, where are we with those? And the rest of the meeting is like structured. Okay, these are our strategic initiatives. So there may be 2 or 3, and this is what we're trying to do, and getting feedback from the board. That's the most valuable resource I find. I've tried that, done that. Try this, or this is a potential pitfall you could look at. So
yeah, I mean, I do think there's initially, if you're just starting a board, I think there's some advantages to having this like report out format where you're hearing from key members of the senior management team, and you're starting to learn a little bit more about who they are and their areas of expertise and what they're reporting out on. But then I think as the board starts to mature a little bit, having more of those kinds of report out activities become more of a consent agenda, where you're simply getting that documentation, you're reading it ahead of time. The expectation is that everybody's read all of that. If there's questions that you have about it, then you're asking questions about it, but that you're moving into the more strategic topics that you can have real dialogue around, and you're not taking up too much of the valuable time with, things that you can read ahead of time.
Yeah. I think it's also, though, just to follow up on that, I think, if you're just starting a board or starting to think about starting a board, it's a big change. It's a real change management type of activity, and it's starting to, create conversation around things that perhaps didn't happen before. So if you've got a single, shareholder, trying to get them to open up and share information to, the next generation, then what does that look like, and how does that happen? And that's oftentimes a really hard way to, I mean, you have to start there, but it's not easy, but it's, hopefully some of the tools that we showed will help you guys start to think about that.
I want to jump back. I think you had a question earlier about how long did it take for the board to start gelling together?
Well, you started feeling that.
Yeah, and I think you said after, the second meeting. Mm-hmm. And I think that really can vary. And I can't emphasize enough from my perspective anyway, the importance of the board dynamic and concentrating on how you build those relationships. And I think most people who are working on boards have, they have some business background, they have enough sort of confidence and self-assurance to be offering their opinions when they're sitting around the table. Most of us are not going to be shy sitting around the table providing their insights. What's different is the relationship building that happens over time, where it's the 1 + 1 is greater than 2 results. So, I just, in terms of the Hussey board, the dynamic that's even been developed and the relationships that have been developed between myself and Kevin and Jean and Bruce, and the other board members as well. But in terms of the independent board members, that just takes a little bit of time to form those relationships to the point where, if we need to bounce stuff one another, we have a personnel committee issue that we want to talk about, it's a very natural, comfortable, open, transparent kinds of conversations with a lot of mutual respect.
Good.
Paul, how long have you had your board and how has that evolved over time?
We started in November of 2015 with the formal board as advisors. We kept them for 4+ years, and we've evolved. The biggest things that we were tackling for that 4 years was a final transition from first to second generation, and we actually are changing board members now because my brother and I are more focused on building equity in the company. So we're changing board members out now.
Oh, sorry. Steve, go ahead.
We've talked about this veil of confidentiality around the board. I'm wondering if there's, I guess, probably more of a question for you, Catherine, because you've got such extensive experience being on boards. To what extent is there transparency to others in the company, right down to all employees, about maybe not the discussions, but the results of the discussions?
I think that's been different in every company that I've been involved with. And some of it is culture driven. So one of the companies, the ESOP company that I'm involved with, they're pretty transparent. All of the employees are owners. And I will say, they've taken the ESOP ownership and worked to make it a strategic advantage for the company. And so I think for anybody who looks at ESOP ownership, I think that's the commitment you have to have. You need to be focused on the education and pushing that education and transparency down throughout the entire organization to see the true value of that ESOP ownership. That's what I see here in that company. I think it depends on the topic too, in terms of the transparency around what it is. There's definitely topics that are not ready for prime time and topics that, you want to try and a good example is when you have a key strategic initiative, how do you make that initiative have meaning to every person in the organization, and how do you create the transparency around that, and how do you make sure that people are focused in on that and it's a meaningful initiative to them? And that requires a lot of effort and communication to do it.
Gary, maybe the question really is, as a CEO, how do you translate some of the board decisions to the employees? Or do you? you know?
Not directly a lot. Hussey's got a very open book with all employees. You know, we share financial information, top line to bottom line with the company. We have a monthly meeting. We say where we are in sales. We say where we are in profits. Because we have a 15% profit sharing. So employees are invested in and engaged in how the company is doing. I don't print it out and send it to everybody because we're trying to, but every month we have a company-wide meeting. Everybody comes into our showroom. We go over our financial results. So the employees are engaged in where we're going as a company. Sometimes the strategic initiatives, a little less so. I mean, that's what we're debating the strategy with the board. For a majority of our employees, even though we're open about it, I don't think they know who's on our board. We say we have a board, but I don't know if they could name our board members. But
Well, it's mysterious. You can kind of have it behind the curtain.
right.
Yeah.
But
I gotta go talk to the board.
yeah, I would have given you a raise, but the board wouldn't let me.
Yeah, exactly. It's good to have a private higher authority that's very mysterious.
But you got to trust your board. I think that came up earlier. You got to trust the board, and you got to want the board to be there. I was actually on a company for a while that had a very dynamic majority owner, and he half kidding, but he used to say, as a board member on my company's board, you had two votes: is I agree or I resign. And so that probably wasn't the most helpful.
Marnie
input.
or Dottie, did one of you guys have a question that we never got to?
She asked it though, it's a great question.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a different one, but I meant to ask it earlier about board evaluations. How often do you recommend that process being done?
So I'll just say what we do. We do it at Hussey Seating annually, but it's only for the board members whose terms are expiring. So, and you know, things that are, and it's pretty subjective. So there's an annual process. We do it for outside board members and to a lesser extent, family members. Like, did they show up? Are they prepared? You know, but probably not a lot beyond that. So it's part of our annual process. I don't know, you know, how others have done it.
I would say annually. We did it at the Sun Journal. Whether the term was expiring or not, it was done annually.
So whatever works, right?
Does the board member rate themselves?
We did not have that process, but I don't know.
We haven't. I know it's something that has been talked about, you know, doing a 360 evaluation type of thing. But to date, we've not done that. But
I was
it's
just thinking,
kind of
you
a
know, there,
next
you
step.
have the sort of, these are all the things that we expect from you.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The CEO or the?
The shareholders, because the board typically, the way you know, I think you said it earlier, but the board works for the family, right? And their job is to manage the leadership of the business and make sure that the business is running smoothly and management takes care of the business. So the family really is the one that is evaluating the board. And so if we have, we have 3 family members, 3 family seats on the board. So those are the folks that are rating or evaluating the outside members. That's the way we do it. So, but I'm sure there are a number of ways to do things. I mean, that's part of the message that we wanted to say. There's no right way. There's probably some good, better, best, but it's not a one size fits all.
The other thing that I have seen done is boards being evaluated, not necessarily at the individual level, but at the aggregate level.
Yep.
Really kind of looking at what's the effectiveness of the board and what can we do to make the board more effective in its sort of aggregation.
Yep.
Maureen, I think you alluded to this, and Paul, you just did it. Could we get some comments on succession planning and the challenge/opportunity of having a board?
Succession planning for the board or succession planning for management?
No, for the business.
For the business, yeah.
She's an active topic, isn't it?
Ours was pretty passionate. You know, my dad was the founder of the company and he was pretty entrenched. And the board served as a very good buffer for kind of overwhelmed ourselves. So we finally got to get to by taking a lot of the emotion out of it. And there was probably some challenging behavior on both sides of the succession. And the board neutralized a lot of that. Now, a lot of the antics that went on could not go on in front of a neutral board. It was just, it mellowed it out a lot. It really did. I think my brother and I, going through that process, are just kind of coming up for air, saying, okay, now what are we going to do? And a board would definitely help on that. He's 8 years younger than I am and probably has a different time frame for what he wants to do. And it'll be very helpful as we analyze our options.
But it certainly takes that emotion out of the equation, for sure.
Adds that objectivity. I mean, that's the other piece. I mean,
right,
you know, when my brother passed away, there was nobody in the family who was set to take over. And so having the board and Tim and Gary work on a transition plan was probably really critical to the success of our business today. That would have been.
Yeah, I was going to say, without an independent board, when Tim was sick, he was first diagnosed when he passed was almost 2 years, and because Tim and Ann are part of the sixth generation, and so there's two of the sixth generation at the time that were working within the company, and so that without an independent board to be there to say, okay, we're going to professionally run the company and not anointing one of the other two family members as to succeed Tim was you. I can imagine how that process would have gone without an independent board.
Around the dining room table, it would not have been pretty,
it would
right?
Not have, and the company may not be where it is today, but I think that's where an independent board, once the family tree and the branches get bigger and more spread out, it's more of a challenge. But I think our board was critical in that transition period and whatnot.
And the financials for us too were big. To get an outside value, the board helped sell that. Because we're thinking we're going to buy it for here, and somebody thinks it's worth here. The board's like, well, kind of here. So that they did help mitigate a lot of the passion there too.
I'll just to close that topic out. I think in pretty much all of the boards that I'm involved with, it's probably the whole concept of succession is probably viewed as the most important task of the board.
Lindsay?
Paul, for your board, so you have your CEO, do you have a different person to chair for the board, or are you?
No, I was the chair. I made myself the chair.
Was that unanimous?
I don't think we ever voted on it. But it was more setting the agenda and tracking the agenda and keeping a reminder. I think everybody was able to participate and felt like they were equals. It wasn't a lording over CEO. It never got to be like that at all.
So it was at Hussey, when Phil Hussey, when he was president, he was chair of the board, and then Tim was always chair of the board. So it was just when the change.
Because that means so business board, right? And so if you have the previous generation who still has ownership and they're kind of out of the loop trying to be the chair as well as the CEO and also kind of facilitating the board meeting, if you will, can be challenging to try to keep everyone in check and stick to more strategic versus tactical. So I feel like, a chair would be really helpful.
It might be.
Yeah.
I always felt completely in check by the board that they asked really tough questions and you were responsible. So maybe a chair of a board in a more sophisticated setup would be different, but we're not super sophisticated at a board level. It was Very advisory and yes, supportive. And if you met my brother, you'd understand why I'm CEO. He wouldn't, I mean, he's very dynamic but that's not his skill set. And he would be the first to tell you that too.
I have a question for Catherine on systems engineering and the ESOP and maybe some things that you guys learned along the way through that experience, how it's worked out.
Well, so they were in ESOP before I joined
Gotcha.
the board. They've been in ESOP for a long time. I mean, I think ESOPs are kind of trendy right now. And I think they started it quite some time ago. I think it's been a great asset for them. You know, as I said before, I think the reason why it's a great asset for them, and for one, it's a great employee retention vehicle. It's a very much a part of their culture. I mean, they have this great practice where when someone vests in the ESOP, there's a big ceremony and they actually get a vest. And it's actually really emotional. Like it's a big deal. And they've created it as part of how they operate the company. But you know, my own perspective on it is that it's not for everybody. Like ESOPs are not designed for every company, and you have to be dedicated like if you're the leader of the organization, you have to be really dedicated to getting up to speed on how ESOPs work, and you have to be really committed. And because they're complicated, you have to be really committed to sort of teaching people within the organization about the ESOP and making sure that people are wanting to learn about it in a way that allows it to differentiate you. I think for some businesses, either because of lack of sophistication or lack of interest, you know, the ESOP can go a little sideways because it's only serving the purpose of the financial exit of the key shareholder. And if it's only serving that purpose, I don't think that it provides enough of a strategic advantage for the company.
Other questions?
This is another question for Catherine. Is it difficult to give advice to, say, an owner or being a board member if you see difficulties or conflict within the family? And obviously owners, they're very passionate about their family business, and there's conflict that maybe can arise from that. How do you give advice to the owner and how do you navigate through that?
So some of it is who is the owner, what is their style? You know, I'm going back to the building of relationships by and between the various individuals on the board, and trying to establish a rapport and establish the level of trust so that they are open to hearing what your feedback is. I don't tend to hold back very much. I mean, I'm a pretty transparent person. But I also give a fair amount of consideration to venue. You know, what's the right venue for sharing whatever feedback? What is going to be the best opportunity for that feedback to be heard? How can I position it in such a way that I can really get through to somebody? So I spend time thinking about that, and where the best way is to kind of get at that. You know what I mean? But that's a relationship building activity. You know, that doesn't happen on day one when you walk through the door and help out on the board.
It's a great question. Any other questions?
All right. So this will go to each of the panelists. One piece of advice to a family considering a board, what would you give them?
Me to start.
Gary and I went like that.
Yeah,
I missed that. I think our biggest problems that we ran into over a long period of time was not sitting down, and we were so mired in the day-to-day tasks that we never sat down and shared what our long-term visions were. And it really cost us a lot in relationships. to sit around the table and have somebody suggest that we shrink the size of the company when we've been growing it for 20-something years was a shock. And that's how bad the communication was. So when we sat down finally to bring the board in, we did have an established agenda of what we were trying to accomplish. And I would say that's the biggest thing. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to get out of a board? And our biggest focus was to finish the family transition to the next generation, and we got there.
You know, I keep coming back to the theme of the relationships, but there's, in my mind, creating the culture and dynamic of the board in such a way that honest, transparent, you know, trusting relationships exist so that people can be vulnerable, but also, you know, people can provide honest feedback and know that they're still supported, even if it's a critique, right? And then the other piece of that is if there is something that's making the dynamic not work, then fixing that quickly. Like if it's a difficult conversation that you have to have with an independent board member that says, for some reason, this just isn't clicking, you know, then that's the conversation that has to happen. Because you won't get to that place where you've created the environment that you want for communication if you've got something that's throwing a wrench in it at every meeting. And the time's too valuable to the organization and to all the people who sit around the table not to find the best way to take advantage of it.
Okay. No, I would agree. I would encourage everybody to get a minimum advisory board. To me, it's free consulting. It really gives you the opportunity, maybe not free, but it's, it gives you the opportunity to, again, as the entrepreneur or as the individual contributor, if you will, to be able to just ask questions, get advice. At the end of the day, you're still in charge. I mean, it's your business. It's your final decision, but the more input you have from smart people that may have been walked a mile in your shoes, you're going to make a better decision. So I think that the more information you can get and experience, I think the better decision you're going to make. Because at the end of the day, it's still your decision because it's your company and the other shareholder. But I think strong boards to me equals strong companies, and I think I'd encourage everybody to I like your process, whether it starts with an advisory board and goes to a full board. I think that's important. And I'm on the board at Tilson. I don't know if many of you heard of Tilson, but they're a rocket ship. And I started with Josh and Mike when they were a small company, and they was on their advisory board. And then they've gone through that whole process, and now they have a full board. And so seeing that process work, having that both board members was valuable to Josh and getting that input to him as he was growing the company.
All right, then I think I turn it over to you, right?
So now it's, thank you all very, very much. We really appreciate it. As I mentioned before, we do have some fabulous door prizes. So we're going to send our survey around.
Oh, sure.
The surveys really help us grow our programming. And we've gone from 95 to 99 to 100% good to excellent. So hopefully, I think it was an excellent program.
You're not leading the witnesses.
No, right. But we do really appreciate your honest feedback. And if you have ideas for other programs, we appreciate that. And if you want to draw card, you have the card in here, and I will.
So do we need to check today, tomorrow?
Whatever works for you.
I'll go get the door.
I have a few minutes when we're done here. What's your schedule like?
I think I'm okay. I have to hold on to it.
I don't think I need a ton of time.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Gary, would you like to pull the first card? I'll let each
Sure.
one of you. Anybody else that want to add their card in before we go? Yeah, okay, good.
Does your board still meet?
Thank you again.
No, we're in the process of getting and in hindsight.
Oh, my goodness.
So I live that.
Can I have a picture of you guys real quick?
Sure.
Just look right here. Okay. Thank you. All right, 1, 2, 3. Thank you, and then I'll have you guys join them afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, when I was pulling together our board packet, and they, started out.
Yeah, we don't have everybody yet.
So I literally, it was a, 100-page document.
Oh, my
put
God.
Together on a monthly basis with
I do, I see him periodically.
Subsidiary P&Ls and,
Thanks again, that was really good.
consolidated P&Ls and.
Do you guys, people drive that monthly?
Oh, when they sent me the template, as we were closing on the transaction, they sent me the template, the board template that they wanted completed each month, but it was still.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
Yeah, ours was more updating,